so?
I used to listen to this was late '70s, early '80s. The show, the station from Connecticut, I could get in, and from like 3 to 6
Hmm.
or 4 to 6, they would play. It was their psychedelic music hour, and they would play all obscure songs from the psychedelic songs from the '60s and stuff. That was great. They would, and they would do it every day during the week. know. So it's cool because I love psychedelic music
Yeah, me too. Me too.
and really obscure things sometimes.
I remember one time I was working. It was in the '80s. I was working at a comic shop, but I could play music in there, and they had their they call it, what do they call it, the lunchtime or music lunchtime or whatever. But they had a theme, and the theme was okay. I can't remember exactly what it was. It had something to do with Broward County had a mayor called Nick Navarro, and he was cracking down on obscenity. So the
Okay.
radio station decided we're going to play a bunch of songs and dedicate this block of songs to Nick Navarro, and it was all songs that had curse words in them, like "Showbiz Kids," "Don't Give an F About Anybody Else," "Who Are You," "Who the F Are You," a bunch of other ones. It was just songs that yeah, it was just songs that had the F word or the whatever, and they played a whole hour of it. Those were the days, man.
When I was
Those were the
young,
days.
the one station I listened to, they would do something like some afternoon lunch, and they would play sound
Yeah, the
effects.
afternoon lunch. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
The afternoon lunch.
they would play sound effects of people eating and talking, and
I didn't play that.
when I first heard it, I thought they were at an actual uh,
uh,
diner somewhere, and then it
no,
dawned on
no,
me, oh, these are just sound effects.
no, the afternoon lunch was the funky record that they would play. But I
Yeah.
just remember that Nick Navarro one because every song had a curse word in it, you know, and a lot of them were f bombs. I was like, oh, that's
Okay.
funny. But that was like, well, that was actually in the early '80s. By the '80s, the radio stations were pretty formularized. But then, like we were talking about before, we had a college radio station, and then that's when college radio started happening, where they would play like some British bands,
Right.
REM style band, college, more not just hair metal or
Right.
new wave or whatever, but more, and then some punk and some stuff like that. So that kind of became a thing. I remember listening to WVUM, I think it was from my University of Miami, and they would play some funky stuff on. I used to
Yeah.
like that. That I got influenced into a lot of records. And back then, remember, we used to have all the music magazines. So you would read the review in
Yeah. That's,
Scream,
yeah.
Circus, or whatever, and that would kind of influence you in a way,
Yeah.
maybe to buy something.
Yeah.
But there were writers like Robert Christgau who just hated everything for the most part. So I would never go by him because it would be like, well, he hates everything except for like, Motown or whatever. So I can't. But they were right in a lot of ways. Like
Yeah.
they would warn you. Like this record is like, I mean, take it from me. This record is one good song and a bunch of. But here's the other thing, man. In my Dennis Hopper imitation, you back then you would buy that record, whatever it was, and you'd say, well, there's only one good song on it. Well, if you listen to it now, you might have a different opinion
Yeah.
because it's been 40 years
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of changes to music and there's been a lot of things that's been going on and your tastes change and your comparisons change. Back then, let's say you listen to, well, here's one right here, that McCartney. This was like the first McCartney. I say, oh man, this is like half instrumentals. It doesn't sound like the Beatles at all.
Yeah.
But then after 50 years, 40 years, you're like, this is a cool record.
Yeah.
But I was comparing it to what he did like a couple of years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you
Exactly.
take it in historical fashion and you have like a timeline for it, a lot of stuff is going to sound a lot better to you.
Yeah. And a lot of stuff I used to love, a lot of songs I used to love. When I hear them now, I'm like, ugh, don't change the channel because
That happens too.
they just don't connect like they used to.
Like that Focus Moving Waves, I may listen to it because I remember as a kid I had the same reaction as you did. The same. Me and my friend put it on. We bought it. He bought it at Jay Byron's. We put it on, and it was like, what?
Yeah.
We were expecting we were expecting like Black Sabbath or
Yeah,
something like
exactly.
that, and it was like, what? Okay, but maybe that's the other thing about it. You got to go back and listen to this stuff and take it into consideration of the times and
Yeah.
what's happened since,
Right.
and I compare it to what's going on today, and I go, this is way much this throwaway song, whatever you want to call it, is so much better than anything that's being done today because it
Yeah,
was done on
exactly.
analog tape, it was done
Right.
in the studio,
They
they had a
didn't.
producer,
They
they
didn't.
had a band of talented people, and they were all musicians collaborating. It wasn't like some guy in wherever in a room or in a with a computer with Pro Tools, like doing stuff and tweaking it and making it perfect.
Yeah.
No, what you get is what you get, and it was humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that song from ELP from the beginning when he
Yeah,
starts
yeah, great
the
song.
string squeaks. That makes the song.
What squeaks on it?
He's playing the guitar and
Oh,
his
you could hear the
fingers.
guitar going up and down the frets. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
squeak. That helps make the
Exactly.
song. But
Exactly.
today they get
They'll
rid of
take it
it.
out.
It would sound soulless. That's the problem. It sounds
That's the
so,
problem. Yeah, they take the soul out of it. They take the humanity out of it.
and it
I,
also starts everything starts sounding the same or similar, and it's
you remember back then, bands try to be different from each other.
yeah.
Now they want them all to sound the same.
Yeah, exactly. And even not just different from each other, different areas of the country would have different sounds too. The Beach Boys had a much
Yeah,
different sound than in Southern California than in like Washington State,
or New
Chicago,
York City
or
or
New
whatever.
York
Yeah,
City, the central area. It's not like that now.
yeah.
Everything,
The Midwestern rock was like your, Bob Seger or
yeah,
REO or whatever. Your New York rock was more like Lou Reed or
yeah,
whatever. Your LA was folk singers and country singers and
yeah,
Neil Young and all that. And in the South you had the Allman Brothers and the country
yeah,
the not country rock but whatever you want to call Southern rock or whatever,
yeah,
which I never really liked that much even though I live here. It was okay. Leonard Skinner, the Allman Brothers were fine. I just never got into some
yeah,
of the other guys, but if I listen to it now I probably like it a lot better than I used to, but
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's funny how your tastes do. You wouldn't think it, but your tastes do change, and
because
like
it's also nostalgic. It's also, don't forget, it's also nostalgic because you
yes,
listen to
that's
those
true.
records and they take you back.
That's true.
They'll give
But
you a memory of a good day or of
yeah,
somebody that was around or
yeah,
something, and
yeah,
you'll go
exactly.
like, yeah,
That's what. In fact, I made a streaming. I'm in the process of making playlists of songs for like different ages, like songs I used to listen to when I was
hmm
9, when I
yeah.
was 12, when I was 15, and that puts me in a different mood. And when I'm drawing, it helps me sort of recapture something about how I draw, the things I liked, what mood or image I'm trying to capture, or So I'm trying to use music to sort of bring me back in time to certain places and certain ways I think to help me create. You know,
So there's so many records that I bought in the 70s or whenever, and it was like, yeah, this is okay, but
yeah,
man, like 10 years later, I think it's a masterpiece.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Some of the Neil Young stuff, like Tonight's the Night or On the Beach, I was like, this is kind of ragged. It's okay, I like some of it, but then like as the years go by, it's a masterpiece. It was on. It's like it's his best work.
Yeah,
It really resonates. It resonates for many reasons because some of these guys back then, like Neil Young, maybe is one, or Dylan, or even the Kinks, they kind of were right. They were 20-year-old guys, but they
hmm
were kind of writing songs that were very much like they were older souls,
yeah, yeah. A
And
lot
at the
of the
time, you're a young kid and you want, hey, I want to have some hard rock, I want some hooks or whatever. But the older you get, these songs start resonating with you, especially the
yeah,
Kinks.
I never was too big a fan of Neil Young. I liked like Cinnamon Girl and
70s Neil Young is greatness for me.
yeah. So I recently, my wife likes Neil Young, so I recently bought a greatest hits and I just put it on for her and I'm listening to him like, damn, where was my head at in the '70s? Because these are great songs. What the? But at the time, like you said, you wanted different things, the hard rock.
I tell you, here's a Neil Young record to listen to, and it's ragged, half of it they're drunk out of their minds. But boy, it's called Tonight's the Night. Listen to it on YouTube. It's a ragged record,
Okay.
but man, this thing has got soul. And these guys are half the record. They're drunk. They did like a wake for a friend of theirs who died, and they just did a one take in the studio. And these songs, it's like back in the '70s, you've never heard anything. Everybody was polished. Everybody was like,
Yeah.
wanted to sound real professional. This guy just said, "Screw it, we're just doing this." Ballsy move. Now, I don't like Neil Young's new stuff at all, but in the '70s, Bowie in the '70s,
Oh God,
freaking
yeah.
golden, man.
Yeah.
Golden.
It's
One of the greatest ever. Genesis in the '70s when they were with Gabriel. Those are my favorite. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a tough record to get into because it's 2 albums and it's a lot of weirdness, but it's on my top 2 or 3 records of all time. I love that record so much. But it's one of the weirdest records you'll hear,
yeah.
because it's accessible, but they go into this weird like abstract things, and a lot of people say they did that because they just wanted to take up space because they didn't have enough songs and just to fill in. But I don't care. I love it.
Well, sometimes that's the best stuff. Like a lot of songwriters they'll just start playing a riff and then they start riffing off each other.
Yeah.
And the guy will start singing, and then the next thing you know, they got this great song that's a hit. And it's like
Exactly, or even if it's not a hit, it's a song that fits the record perfectly,
yeah,
or it's just a feeling you get from it.
yeah, exactly.
Here's another record that back then people used to trash, Led Zeppelin 3. Oh yeah, it's not as good as 4 and Led Zeppelin 2 and all that. It's a great record. It's just different.
Yeah,
It didn't get its. I mean, it's got some songs on it towards the end that are kind of weird, but I love them. You know
yeah,
why? Because they are weird.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they go
You know,
off.
back then I just wanted a whole lot of love and Stairway to Heaven and Black Dog, but you listen to the weird stuff in there like Hass After Roy Harper or something like that, which is really weird, but I kind of like it because it takes me back.
Yeah,
And it
exactly.
also shows me that these guys were experimenting.
Yeah,
Yeah, some of these Zeppelin records, if you got the original records, I don't know which one it is. One of them, the first one or the second one, apparently, if you got a good turntable, you can hear like the squeaking bass kick drum
oh,
on Bonham. You can hear like, while he's kicking it. I'm like, that's
that's cool.
cool.
Yeah, that's what
But
you want. You want that humanity, that feeling of like there are real people behind these songs, and they're singing about life and different things, and it helps make you think. Now, I don't like any of the new music now.
there's some good stuff out there, but it's hard to find because
It's
it's not on
almost
the radio. Back then, we used to listen to it was communal. We listened to the radio. We
yeah,
almost all heard the same stuff. Now it's like crapshoot.
yeah, exactly. And then also like if you go streaming, that's the one problem with streaming. They break it up into categories. So if you want to listen to hard rock, they have a streaming
Yeah.
channel for that. If you want to listen to progressive rock, I want to listen to a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, you want to listen to a melting pot of
Yeah,
stuff or whatever.
yeah,
If you want to stick in some new bands, go ahead. I mean, maybe, sometimes if you stick a new band and you mix it in between two older things, sometimes it blends and you go, oh, I kind of like that,
yeah,
and kind
yeah,
of
exactly.
at it. Whereas if you just segregate it and put it in its own section, it might sound too much like everything else and you'll go, it's just the same crap. But if you kind of take it out of its comfort zone and put it somewhere else, you never know. I don't
That's
go on
also
Spotify or anything like that, though,
yeah,
no.
that's another thing. In the past, albums would sometimes have, regardless of the band, like Black Sabbath, it's metal, like the first metal band or whatever.
But
But if you listen to, I forget what the album it is, you have this slow song, Sweet Leaf,
yeah, yeah, the
have a
Master of
really
Reality.
hard rock song, and then you'll have an instrumental.
Yes, Master of
You know,
Reality. Yeah.
and yeah, Masters of Reality. It will vary, and a lot of
Yes, exactly.
bands would vary the song. Now you put it on, each song is almost exactly the same, and they're boring.
Black
It's so
Sabbath, if you listen to some of their records of the first five, you can see prog on some of them.
mhm,
You can see like instrumentals on some of them. A
mhm.
couple of them have like some crappy ballads with Ozzy. But then you hear other stuff that's like instrumentals that kick ass. What's the one that's got some great stuff on it? The fourth one, Volume 4, Supernaut. It's a great instrumental. I was like, wow. That's Black Sabbath. You know, they're kicking.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, and it's all because they're experimental. Let's try this.
experimenting
They're
because
musicians.
everybody else was experimenting.
Yeah,
Everybody
everybody
was.
else. Yeah, I remember. I think it was George Martin talking about the Beatles, how they would come in and like Paul McCartney came in. It's like I was watching this thing and I heard this horn on the
Can we put it on
something like
this record? Yeah.
classic music. It's a French horn. I want to put it on this on this album. So they worked with and I think they used it for Penny Lane or
Penny Lane.
something.
Yeah. Yeah. A
Yeah,
fugal horn or something.
they were
Yeah.
musicians who loved music. They loved
Well,
experimenting, finding their voice.
McCartney was very competitive. He wanted to out top everybody, and he
Yeah,
knew he had the band and the producer to do it. You know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's why they were so great. You know,
yeah, exactly.
because they were actually trying to top everybody.
Yeah,
McCartney in the '70s was fine too, but he was just writing songs. He wasn't trying to top everybody. Because if you look at the '70s, you look at the Beatles in the '60s, and they were like the most progressive of them all.
right.
When they broke
Really
up,
changed
you
the
could
music.
when they broke up, they became songwriters. But then
Yeah,
you started getting bands like Genesis and King Crimson, and they were doing the progressive stuff.
right,
They were doing the
exactly.
wild stuff.
Right.
And the beat and the Fab Four were doing great songs, but they were no longer the driving force
Right.
in what was supposed to be like the cutting edge of music.
Right.
You know, they still
Yeah.
put out great songs. I still love their solo albums, but they weren't Roxy Music, they weren't Genesis, they weren't Crimson, they weren't whatever. You know, they were just
Right.
them.
Yeah.
But as a group with George Martin in the '60s, they were the they were
So,
the
oh,
they were the leaders. And
really, and really,
if they weren't the leaders, they would have been. If they heard something, they would just knock it out. And they would go, okay, that sounds like the Byrds. Let's put some Rickenbacker guitar on this record and sound like the Byrds, but it'll be like our song.
yeah,
You know. And you would
yeah,
hear the Beatles version of it because the kids were buying it. They were the most popular thing in the world. That's the only time in my life that I think I can think of where the best music made was the most popular music ever made. Maybe like in Frank Sinatra days, if somebody else, or classical days. But in my generation, the Beatles were the most popular band, and they were also the most innovative band in the '60s.
yeah, and it led to a lot of great other bands
Other
being
bands
influenced. I mean,
competing and trying to outdo them.
they have they had such a strong influence on other
Yeah, but
bands. The Beatles themselves.
in the '60s you had the Beatles on one hand, you had the Velvet Underground out in New York, you had the Doors, you had a lot of people doing different things, but the Beatles were still the top band. They were still doing some of the wildest stuff. There
Right.
were other influences coming in though,
Right.
you know, and even in the '70s there was a lot of bands like, you know, fighting against each other and doing weird stuff and fusion. You know, jazz rock was starting to kid
Right.
in, and bands were starting becoming more technically virtuoso in a way.
Yeah.
In the '60s, you had some of it, but by the '70s, you really started getting
Yeah.
serious musicians that could play the hell out of it and play different styles. And you know, you still had the Rolling Stones doing their stuff, but they were doing their best stuff in the early '70s and the late '60s. But you had Mahavishnu Orchestra, you had like, you know, a lot of fusion bands, the prog bands. The majority of them were like a lot of them were virtuoso keyboard player Keith Emerson,
Hmm.
Robert Fripp on guitar, Steve Hackett, you know, all these guys, Rick Wakeman. They were the best, and
Yeah.
they were playing some of the best music. It was
Yeah.
a
Exactly.
great. I think the era between '64, '65, and '74,
Yeah.
that was the best era for rock music.
Yeah.
But when the
Exactly.
Beatles started to get big in the US till like almost the end of real prog, '74, '75, that was the best. Because after that you got punk, and that's fine, but that's not my thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a fan of punk. I was a fan of new wave because that
New
also
Wave's
had
fine.
varying
It was keyboard
styles.
driven in a lot of ways,
Some of it, yeah.
and it was a
It
lot
was,
more fun and up or
yeah,
whatever, you
and it
know.
wasn't as innovative as this, like you said, 64 to
To
7.
74, 74, 75, yeah.
um, but and I liked it
Well,
because it
it
did
was
have,
innovative in the use of synthesizers and
right,
drum machines, and that was all like kind of like from Kraftwerk and people like
yeah,
that. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it was
exactly.
innovative in its way.